So in today's video, we're going to talk about invoice factoring with my guest, who I've known for a number of years now. He's with Triumph Business Capital. He is Angelo Standriff. Angelo, appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, good morning, Shane. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Hanging in there. It's almost Friday, so can't complain. Yeah, so what I wanted to talk to you about is what your company does, but invoice factoring, specific niches. We'll talk about some of the deals and what things are looking like in this economy, and then any other details that you may want to talk about. But let's first start off with Triumph Business Capital. You're the VP of Business Development. What do you guys do?
So, Triumph Business Capital, we're a subdivision of TBK Bank, and what we specifically do is provide flexible financing through invoice factoring, specifically for the transportation industry. And in that industry, it's our focus is fleets, owner operators, as well as freight brokers. So those are the types of clients that we specifically work with, and that is the only industry that we do work with.
So tell me about what's the latest in the factoring industry from your point of view.
Sure. So the factoring industry as a whole has been it's been fairly competitive, and there's been a lot of players entering the market, especially coming out of COVID. I know that giving you a little bit of background, COVID really impacted the factoring industry in obviously many ways. Mainly, the PPP process took away the need for cash flow for a lot of growing businesses during that time, and that's usually where factoring comes into play. Is that you've got businesses who have this need for consistent cash flow. Well, when PPP was able to cover that cash flow gap for them, there was really no need for factoring. So it was kind of stagnant there for a while. Now that we're coming out of it, there certainly seems to be some optimism in terms of growth for businesses that are looking ahead and that are coming out of the PPP era and now are looking back towards different ways to find financing and find consistent cash flow solutions, which is what I think the factoring industry is primed to do.
Got it. All right. And so, with technology in your business, have you guys either implemented anything or have you seen any changes that affect your business?
Absolutely. So that's something specific to Triumph that we have certainly emphasized is that our resources dedicated to technology. Being part of a publicly traded bank has allowed us the ability to offer multiple financing solutions outside of factoring as well, which is a couple of divisions. But in that, we focus primarily on technology, and that being something that it helps the client, it helps operations, the back office, and all of our service representatives to make sure that we're doing things in the most efficient way possible. So technology has played a huge part of it.
Gotcha. Okay. And are you seeing things pick up, in terms of deals, either quantity or, yeah, I mean, basically quantity?
Yeah, I would say so. Specifically for transportation, which is obviously what we focus on, this was a heading late summer is usually a dead period, but then our peak season is at the end of the year. So usually around this time, you've got a bit more of a need from owner operators, fleets, and freight brokers who are growing and seeing a lot more activity on their end and have more of a need for cash flow heading into the fall and winter season.
Okay. And let me, ask you, as far as, there was a lot of logistical, backlogs and the whole transportation, when COVID hit and so forth. Is that kind of smoothing out from, the information you're gathering?
Yeah, so that during that time, it was one thing that was unique to Triumph during the COVID time was that since transportation was its focus, it actually transportation ended up being a boom at the time. So
Mm,
trucking, a lot of people got into the trucking industry because spot rates and ticket rates for loads had just skyrocketed because there was such a need to move product around. So Triumph saw, and other factors who were in the industry saw a huge pickup in that. What we're seeing now is that it's slowing down a little bit. So I would say it's coming down from a great market to a good market in transportation is probably the best way to put it. In terms of supply chain, it looks like we're still having some issues with other parts of the supply chain, but transportation as a whole seems to be pretty steady looking ahead.
And so let's, kind of change gears a little bit to the types of
Mhm.
referral partners that you work with or you like to work with.
Sure. So I typically work with the folks that are specific to transportation and where those needs are for either truck owners or fleet owners or freight brokers. Where do they typically go first in order to get their business up and running and continue its growth? And that's usually insurance agencies who focus on providing insurance for fleets, or there's accountants that focus primarily on transportation and have a book of clients and that work in the transportation industry as well. And fuel agencies as well. So people who provide fuel cards to fleets are usually another good referral partner for us. So that's typically the folks that I reach out to and try to work with on a regular basis.
And talk to me about deals and specifics on a deal, like an example of how, a deal might work for those that may not be familiar.
So for those that may not be familiar with factoring as a whole, a factoring deal typically looks like a facility where a company can submit their invoice for, let's call it $1,000 to their factor. And let's say this company sold a widget to Walmart. And what they'll do is they'll submit this invoice and to their factor, or their factor will give them, say, 85% of the invoice within 24 hours. And then the factor will wait to collect the full 1,000 from Walmart. And once they get the full 1,000 from Walmart, they'll give back that remaining 20 or 15% less a fee. And that fee is usually between anywhere from 1 to 5%, depending on the deal. But specifically for transportation, this is what makes it unique. Transportation is much more aggressive in their advance and upfront, and much more aggressive in their rates, because the transportation space is pretty consistent when it comes to payables and when they pay. So, typically in transportation, you see net 30, sometimes net 45, but either way, it pays fairly quickly compared to some other industries, which allows factors such as Triumph to offer a much more aggressive advance rate as well as a factoring fee. So specific to Triumph and the transportation space, what we'll offer is, on an invoice that a trucking company had dropped off a load and they've got $1,000 of an invoice that they'd like to submit to Triumph. Well, Triumph could advance anywhere up to 98% of the invoice amount and then only have a 2% flat fee. So it's a much more aggressive upfront. You get 98% within 24 hours of receiving the invoice, and then not having to worry about collections or any sort of reserve balance left over. And that fee obviously adjusts depending on the volume, but that's usually what the specifics of a deal would look like.
All right. So, to kind of get out of here on a fun note, what's one of your most memorable deals, crazy, wild, or just memorable overall?
Sure. So, memorable overall, I had a guy that came across who I've been talking to here and there. He was a freight broker, so his responsibility was to move freight, but he actually didn't own any trucks himself. He got a customer in a milk company, and the milk company contracted him to move hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of milk within school districts that he was involved with. Well, the issue is that this freight broker at the time was only doing about, maybe 100,000 a year. Well, now he was about to do almost 500,000, close to $1 million a month just with this milk company. Wow. So he called kind of and said out of nowhere, I really need to get this set up by the end of the week and get things going. And thankfully we were able to do so and get himself set up to where we were able to pay his carriers, because he was a freight broker that would hire carriers to move the milk. And be able to credit approve the milk company themselves to factor the invoices for this broker. So by the end of the week, we had funded him a couple 100,000 and make sure that all of his carriers were paid, and he was off and running. So that was just something crazy. I never thought that, you don't think about milk too often, but that ended up being a pretty big deal for this guy.
That's true. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't have thought of that. Wow, yeah, that's a big jump for him too. Good for him.
The schools need it.
Yeah, that's true. Remember those milk days in school. All right, well, great. Well, listen, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about Triumph, or how to contact you or anything like that? Or
sure. Well, I think it'd be good for me just to clarify exactly, so I do invoice factoring specifically for Triumph underneath Triumph Business Capital. Now, Triumph as a whole, as I mentioned earlier, does offer multiple financing solutions such as equipment financing. And since we're part of a bank, we do offer traditional lines of credit, as well as we've got some fuel programs and insurance for fleets. So that is the enterprise of solutions that we do offer at Triumph. But just so people, in case you have any questions about it, I'm obviously open to, if you have my contact information, happy to direct you to the right place if you have a question. But specifically, invoice factoring is what I do for Triumph.
Great. All right. Yeah, and I'll for sure put your contact info below once we post this in our blog. So, well, listen, Angela, it's been great. I really appreciate you joining me, and let's catch up again down the line, see how everything's going, and we'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shane.
All right, Angela. Thanks.